In the previous episode, I mentioned the first person to record sound was Edouard Leon Scott de Martinville, who was a French bookstore owner who wanted to find a way to make an automatic stenographer. So he developed the phonautograph. The phonautograph was originally a lab tool used to visually study sound. In 1877, Thomas Edison developed his phonograph, which was a way to record and listen to sound. Now, you may be wondering what the difference between the phonograph and phonautograph was. And the main difference was in the fact that the phonograph could play back sound, but the phonautograph couldn't. Like I said earlier, the phonautograph was used as a way to visually study sound, and the phonograph was used as a way to record conversations and hear them back later. In 1878, Thomas Edison was asked by the city of New York to do an examination on the sound coming from the railway system, the above-ground railway system, and he ended up turning his phonograph into a phonautograph without realizing who Scott was. Edison used the phonautograph that he invented in order to study the sound coming from the railway system and suggest ways that the city could cancel out the noise. The way that the phonautograph would work is it would have a piece of lamp-blackened paper on a spindle, and as it would spin, a stylus with pig hair on it would etch the sound waves into the paper. And then the person using the phonautograph would look at what was now called a phonogram and study the different effects that distance and other environmental factors would have on the production of sound. 10 years after Edison invented the phonograph, the gramophone was invented by Emil Berliner. The way that the phonograph worked is it would record to a tin or wax cylinder. Berliner decided to try and improve on this design by creating a disc. Berliner decided to try and market his gramophone in Germany with the German Gramophone Company. And this didn't last very long, but nobody knows exactly how long it lasted. After the German Gramophone Company dissolved, Berliner decided to try and found his first North American company. The company was based in New York and was called the American Gramophone Company, but unfortunately, before he could even release one machine or recording, the company fell apart. In the late 1890s, Emil Berliner refounded his company, this time as the United States Gramophone Company. The original gramophone used a hard rubber disc, but when he refounded the company in the late 1890s, he decided to move on to a shellac compound. This shellac compound was used until vinyl records came along. At the time of the founding of the United States Gramophone Company, they were being made by Philadelphia-based machinist Eldridge Johnson. Johnson decided to add a spring to the turntable so that it no longer had to be hand-turned while people were trying to listen to their music. To input sound into the gramophone and phonograph, you had to do it through a horn. This made recording quite complicated, especially when it came to big bands, as you had to have loud instruments in the back and have all your other instruments arranged so that the machine could pick up the noise. A lot of the time, bands decided to use euphoniums instead of tubas and blocks of wood instead of bass drums. The gramophone discs that Emil Berliner developed were very short playing and could only play about 2 minutes at a time comfortably. But this varied depending on how fast the machine would play the sound, as there was no standard set for how fast the disc should rotate. It could range from 75 to the usual 70 all the way down to 60 rotations per minute. Eventually, Emil Berliner had to deal with a bunch of people that were copying his patent and leeching off of his business, and he was dealing with a lot of lawsuits, and this ended up destroying his will to work in the gramophone business in the United States. Berliner ended up transferring all of his patents to Eldridge Johnson, who then transformed it to the Victor Talking Machine Company and re-entered the industry. Victor ended up becoming one of the biggest companies in the gramophone industry. Edison tried to counteract the popularity of the gramophone by increasing the speed at which the cylinders rotated in his phonograph, but unfortunately this still couldn't pass the quality that the gramophone had due to its disc playback system. Edison tried to convince the public that his cylinders were superior to the discs, but nobody believed him. And instead of switching to discs himself, he just continued on for years trying to say that his cylinders were better. Thanks for watching episode 2 of History Monday, and I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to check back next week at 9 a.m. sharp so you can see the next episode, and follow us on Twitter, the blog, and of course Patreon, so you can keep on getting those updates. Our Patreon subscribers get a sneak peek at all of our upcoming content, and I hope that you feel free to join us there. Thanks very much. See you next week.